An entrepreneur and an innovation leader. And by the way, one of my questions for him is for him to tell us what an entrepreneur is. So once we get into the question portion. With over a decade in innovation-based roles, Michael has a track record for entrepreneurship and product development that has seen him bring multiple successful products to market. With experience across multiple startups, including his own, and corporate innovation roles, Michael works at the intersection between business strategy, disruptive technology, and customer experience. I'm going to steal that line, by the way. That's an awesome line. To develop innovative strategy and forward-looking product. As the general manager at Zero Gravity Labs, Michael is responsible for business leadership of the labs, including everything from overarching strategy, team selection, office culture, and branding through formal partnerships and relations with the board of directors. Michael is a proven builder of high-performing innovation teams and business through his agile and team-first approach. Michael is a regular author and conference speaker on topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, developing an innovation culture, and disruptive technology. Michael is also a mentor to multiple startup companies and is a member of the Technology and Innovation Advisory with Sick Kids Hospital Foundation. Give it up for Michael, please. In her last role as the VP of Product Visioning Team at Idea Couture, she led a multidisciplinary team of strategists, designers, anthropologists, and engineers who delivered a wide portfolio of innovative products across health, consumer electronics, and lifestyle categories for such clients as AT&T, Samsung Electronics, HTC, and NASA. How cool is that? Maryam is also a visiting lecturer at the International Space University, where she holds an annual workshop on applied innovation for the commercial space industry. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering from Ryerson University and a Master's in Innovation Design Engineering from Imperial College London and the Royal College of Art. Give it up for Maryam, please. Organizational culture. How would you measure that? How can you tell if this is going the way that you want it to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So something that we struggled with was to quantify the impact of the work that we were doing for clients. It's really difficult to quantify the impact of innovation, especially when you're working on something that we used to say, it's front-end innovation. It's on the earlier, from research to ideation. Because once you, hand off the work, then it's really difficult to monitor, what happens with it. So I think there are traditional KPIs like, employee retention or happiness or net promoter score for the client that a lot of organizations use to measure, the impact of, how certain, initiatives like innovation initiatives have had an impact on the organization. But something that I actually recently was reading about, McKinsey just published a report on, I think they surveyed 300 public companies, and they were looking at the correlation between using design and excelling at design and the impact of that on organizations' market share and turnover. And what they realized was actually quite surprising to me. The companies that put design in the forefront of their work and the core actually perform twice as better as their peers. Wow. So somebody might read that report and say, great, we're gonna hire a chief design officer, and the next thing, hire design thinking consultants, and we're gonna do much better. Maybe, but I think what you also, 10 layers underneath that insight, you realize that design is at the core of the company, meaning, the CEO, the C-suite truly believe that design should not be an afterthought. It's not just a tool to, make your brand pretty or it's not just a campaign. But it's truly something that fundamentally can change your organization internally and externally. I don't know if I answered your question directly, but absolutely. I think there's no one KPI that I can think about that quantifies the impact of innovation. But this one case study, I think, shows that the C-suite's openness to thinking about other measures in the organization other than the traditional KPIs can definitely be an indication of how well an organization might be performing.
Yeah, no, excellent, excellent answer. And it seems like a lot of what we're hearing, I think a theme that I'm taking away from tonight is a theme of values. And I know no one's asking me any questions, but I'm going to throw in my 2 cents. Sometimes when I talk to organizations about goals versus values, I find a lot of times when I bring up values, especially when I'm talking to some big heavyweight clients, they almost laugh at that when I talk about values. And they will say, like, now Danny, like real business is done on goals. We don't want to talk about values, right? And it's interesting, and I'll bring up, only because I brought it up already, I'll bring up Blockbuster. And Blockbuster was a goal-oriented company. I read numerous reports on Blockbuster, and the goal was we want to make as much money as possible through our video stores. But what if they weren't a goal-oriented company? What if they were a value-oriented company? And what if that value was we want to provide our clients with the best at-home entertainment possible? Then they wouldn't be so quick to reject the notion of streaming. The notion of streaming was interfering directly with their goal. The goal, of course, to make as much money as we can off of our investment of all these stores. But if the value was, let's provide a really good experience, they would most likely still be here today. So I know nobody asked me that, but that's my thoughts on that. So you're welcome. So Michael, I'm gonna jump to you, and I'm gonna ask this: how do you measure the things that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think Maryam set it up great. I was actually doing my end of year self-evaluation for my boss this morning, and of course this is the time where you're like, okay, well, did I hit my KPIs or KPOs? And then I realized, I have no KPIs or KPOs. But what we have agreed on is territories of value. So we will provide value to the organization in multiple ways. One of those ways is, yes, we will be pushing new products or MVPs or pilots, and so you can, yes, that's a quantifiable thing. But if I'm compensated on how many I get into market, I'll make them all this big, and I'll get 100 into market, right? So what we really want to talk about is, are we pushing value for the organization? The other areas that we can provide value is pipeline of talent. Are we creating a reputation in market that attracts a certain type of employee that maybe wouldn't come work for us if we didn't get a reputation as a progressive area? Are we changing the conversation with customers and prospects? Because I used to go to a lot of business development meetings, and in those meetings, so I work for a loyalty company, it is literally transactional. And we're a service provider. And in the moments where you started talking about innovation, then you became partners. You started holding hands. And so we changed the way that we were thinking and the way that companies that we were pitching to or talking to were thinking about us. And so, I don't know that at the end of the day that this is the right way to do it. This is the way that we're doing it. But we sort of agreed upon, we will provide value to the organization in these territories. And then it's sort of on me and my boss to agree upon what that means.
Yeah, I love it. I like the talk about partnerships rather than looking at it as business and client. Let's create some partnerships here. So Gabe, same question. How do you go about measuring the great things that we're talking about here?
So in our work with government, government is both really good and really bad sometimes at measuring the impact of what it does. And so ultimately what we're really, as a mission-driven nonprofit, what we're really interested in is driving better outcomes for residents. That's what it's about for us. Along the way, obviously a lot of this stuff comes into play. And to be honest, the best tools that we've got, this is something that we're really actively working on. And so the best tools that we have right now are, literally to be talking to our partners in government to understand kind of pre-engagement, what are their practices, what's their awareness of different ways of working, and then we'll do a lot of that same assessment later on, and as well as on an ongoing basis to see sort of where they're at in terms of how are they working, who's on their teams, what kinds of tools and processes are they using, and how's that working for them? So it's I'd say it's mostly a pretty qualitative kind of assessment for us around how things are going for them.
Awesome. So Maryam, I want to go back to something that you did touch on this. So I think I know how you're going to respond, but I want to ask the question outright. Do you think physical environment helps to foster this type of culture, what we're talking about now? And would you have, or do you have, dedicated innovation places?
I have strong feelings about this. One of my favorite things or moments when I used to go to clients' offices was, all of a sudden you see a dedicated, area or an entire floor that has been reconfigured with glass walls, brick facades, and tons of sticky notes and markers flying off, and now it's like the innovation hub, or it's the lab, or it's garage, or whatever you want to call it. And to be honest, most of the time this is a client show factor, and it's a quick, it's a band-aid.
So they're doing it for someone else.
Either for someone else, or just to show to their employees or whoever the stakeholders are that we are serious about this. Whereas I'm not saying it's not important. That's it. Cubicles are. I'm not sure if they're the best way to stimulate collaboration. But what I'm saying is, being serious about innovation and creating the culture of innovation, first of all, takes time. It's not a renovation project. It's not an interior design exercise. And it has to run through multiple levels of organization. It needs to come top down. It needs to be bottom up. And while I think a space can be and should be inspiring, every office needs to be inspiring. You need to feel good, whether you're walking into your accountant's office or a major Fortune 500 company. But I think that's just table stakes. I also don't think, naming a team an innovation team is necessarily the best way to, maybe it's good to start so that you create a center of excellence for innovation, but I think you need to make sure that the learnings and the practices are being trickled down to multiple levels of the organization. One of the best examples that I've seen is what Lululemon does, which is they have a white space team. Which is a very multidisciplinary team of scientists, designers, and many other practices. But what they do is they define cohorts. So they take employees from multiple different units, and they make sure that those people run through 2-3 months of not just education and learning, but also actually being involved in the process of white space mapping and whatever the exercise is, so that everybody gets to feel what it's like to be part of this fast-paced
certain jobs to go after a younger market, where they would call them ninjas or rock stars or what have you. And it's you could very well be an inside sales rep or a phone clerk or what have you, but you're now being called a ninja clerk, right? What are your thoughts on that? Good idea, bad idea? You hate it?
I think I answered that question already.
Yeah.
They're performance spaces for innovation theater.
Yep, all right. Now, Michael, before I ask you, maybe you could just nod with your head. Do you have a similar answer, or do you have something different? Because you have something there, I'm going to ask you another question.
I can go a little bit different.
Yeah? All right, I like that.
So I work at Zero Gravity Labs. We do have an innovation space. We are off-site from the main corporate office. But I think I would agree in many senses that the reasons that we moved off-site, the reason that we have a dedicated space, it's a short-term thing. We wanted to show our employee base, we wanted to show the outside world that we are committed to this, that this is a top-down thing. The CEO is the one who signs the lease. But I was in with our executive team the other week, and I was saying to them, we're going to grow the team next year, and we're going to start taking some of the people from the main part of our organization and seconding them to where we are, because what we're really trying to achieve is that the rest of the organization over time looks like and acts like the people that we have in our innovation space. So the space itself, it's a nice space. It has very few, it has no offices, just meeting rooms. It's all open concept. It's all the things that you would expect from a space. But for us, it was a little bit symbolic. But what we really hope to do over time is transition the type of thinking and the type of people that we have in the company. And so what I said to the executive team is, over time, I hope to take everybody from technology, not because I want to build a fiefdom, because if we've done that, then we no longer have an innovation team. Everybody's on the innovation team. We've broken down those walls and those barriers.
I think then what I'm getting is that as long as there's sincerity behind it, right? If you're doing it, to Miriam's point, to put on a show, that's never going to work well for long-term results, right? You might fool somebody once, but for long-term results, you're not going to have any real success with that. But if you're sincere behind some of these things that you're putting in place, then I think that's really what's going to make the difference. So let me ask you this now. For someone who's employed these kind of strategies many times throughout their career, throughout their business, would you do different types of innovation strategies for different functions within a company?
Yeah, I think, like everything in life, you have to adapt to the people and the situation and the company. Every company is different. Before doing this at Loyalty One, I was at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. I think the type of way you would drive innovation in that culture is very different than the way you would do it at the company I'm at now. So I do think you have to adapt. I also think there's some universal truths. I do think that openness, an ability to fail, pushing collaboration, celebrating not only the visible wins, but the things that people try, the times that somebody helped somebody else through a problem. Those are things that I think you can apply to any group. But I do think, like anything else, you listen before you talk. You understand the situation you're going into, and you adapt and move in that situation.
Yeah, okay, excellent answer. Gabe, what about you? Same question. In your experience, have you done things differently depending on the teams that you're working with?
Yeah, totally. So, like I said before, on our small nonprofit team, we're on a very different kind of plane than the folks that we're working with in government. And even those in government, where we might be working with two different federal departments, but they might be in very different places. We're working with Transport Canada, and actually they're doing quite well in terms of building out a digital strategy. We might be working with Veterans Affairs, and they're earlier on that pathway. And so while the foundational principles that are driving a lot of our work might be the same, the way that that's playing out and the way that we're approaching them and the kinds of techniques and meetings or workshops that we're having might be very different from one to the other based on their context.
Okay. Excellent. Maryam, same question. So, would you suggest employing the same strategy with regards to culture and innovation, regardless of function of the company?
No, I think, actually, I would have to agree with Michael on that. There are underlying practices that I think are not necessarily, that don't have to be nuanced to every single team and every single practice, but I do, in my, at least experience, I would have to almost change, sometimes even the vocabulary. It would get down to the vocabulary when you're speaking with the engineering and development team versus anthropologists. And I think in order to do that, you need to be able to put so many hats on, even during a single day. C-suite level conversation. So the same strategy, the way you storytell is very different when you're having conversations with C-suite versus, with management and upper management. So, yeah. Yeah,
okay. And talking about people, how would you ensure that you're hiring the right people that would fit a particular culture that you're trying to breed?
I don't necessarily have a single way of, or a list of things that I would go through. I mean, there are the obvious. You want to make sure that they have their experience and their background aligns with the requirement of the role. But something I usually like to do is, and I use the dating analogy, I try to meet them outside of the office, have coffee or drinks with them if they're, at later stages of the hiring process, especially when they're key hires and when they have to mentor and train other people. It's really important to make sure that they embody the values of the organization. And I think, being very open about where the weaknesses of the organization is upfront, which is counterintuitive because you want to impress your new hire. But actually, in my experience, it opens them up to a lot of the things that wouldn't come up in a traditional interview process.
Yeah, I love it. If somebody was with you and you loved them and they were your top pick and you're at a restaurant together or a cafe or something, and the server comes by and you notice some sort of rudeness, unnecessary rudeness towards the server, would that cancel your thoughts on the person?
That wasn't on the question list. I'm just kidding. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I heard that there were some organizations that's what they would do. They would take you out to a restaurant just to see how you interact with the servers. And I got to tell you, I started making love to my servers anytime I had any kind of business meeting, and it's always worked very well for me. So Gabe, same question. How do you ensure that you hire and attract the right talent to breed the culture you're looking to breed?
That's a tough one. I think that coming back to the values thing, I think that in when we're interviewing people, that's one of the things that we spend the most amount of time on, is talking about that, their experiences with values, and recognizing that a lot of environments don't necessarily prioritize those things, so there's sometimes hard conversations to have. But I mean, I think the other side of this that we're often talking to people in government about is how do we make the most of our existing staff? That's often a question that we get, and the fact is that while sometimes teams in government are challenging places to work, and that has an impact on people, that there's it's hard to find a group of people anywhere else who are more passionate and committed about the public interest than those who are working in government. And so if you're able to take that time and create a different sort of space for them to really reconnect with what got them into this role in the first place, and what were they excited about when they first joined, and how do we rekindle some of that excitement and passion in order to try something different?
Fantastic. Michael, same question. How do you go about making sure you attract the right talent to do what it is you're trying to do with regards to culture and innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, we recognize that we have a pre-existing team, so that we're looking for how will this person interact with that team. So lots of times we put them in situation. So they'll give them a piece of work, they'll come back and they'll present it to a group of people on the team. Because I want to see, can you handle the fact that on our team, we try and eliminate as much hierarchy as possible. So the 19-year-old co-op might ask you a challenging question. Do you disregard that because it came from somebody who seems like they're going to be junior to you, or do you embrace that? The other thing I think that we've tried to look at is what are some of the common threads between all the people on our team that are making us successful, and then finally, we recognize that when we're hiring people, we're hiring the whole person. We're not just hiring the person who comes to work with us. So we ask them a lot. I think taking them out for a coffee or getting to know who they are and what matters to them outside of work is important, because they're going to bring that to work with them. And so if they're the type of person who's involved in community or goes to meetups or does hackathons, like those are things that we now have seen time and time again bring somebody into our culture that is similar to the type of people that we have, has a drive. But also, if they have a community thing that's really important to them, it tells me a little bit about who they are as a human being. And ultimately, we're trying to hire great human beings. And when they come to work, they're going to do a certain job for us or with us. But we are hiring the whole person, and so understanding a little bit more about who they are as a human also allows me, as somebody who's managing the whole place, to be empathetic to the things that are important to them, and to say to them, do you want to do more speaking engagements? Do you want to write a book? What are the things that are important to you? Because I'm not always going to meet the salaries of a bank or somebody else, but what I can offer is a place where you feel like, well, these people actually care about who I am, and they embrace who I am, and therefore, this is a great place for me to continue to grow my career.
Wow, that's an amazing answer. Are you hiring, and can I send you a resume? Because that sounds like a pretty stellar place. So, yeah, I mean, that is what it's all about. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter the size of your business, doesn't matter your title. We're people trying to work with people, right? And I love how you said, we're hiring a human, right? And I think that's amazing. So just working off of that, what are some obstacles that you've had to deal with Maybe you could tell me about the obstacle, and maybe you can tell me how you overcame them, or how you would suggest to others to overcome them with regards to trying to create a culture of innovation. Obstacles and challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, so I work for a big company, it's 27 or 28 years in business. I think the obstacles are more about, I had to shed caring what people thought of what we were doing. There's lots of people in our business who don't understand what we're doing or why we're doing it. You know, they're like, the website is too slow, the mobile app sucks. Why are we investing in a team that is building robots? We're not building robots, but I wish we were. But they don't really get it. And what I think it's partly because our frame of reference, our purviews are different. You're in a role where you're rewarded on this quarter and next quarter. And I'm in a role that is trying to ensure that 3 years from now we're in business, right? And so I often say to people, if you stay in that role for 24 months, we're going to be best friends. But, I think the challenge and the obstacle for us has been integrating what we're doing back into the mothership, so to speak, because sometimes there's pockets of resistance. And so we've had to take, I think, what we try and take is a very humble approach. We are here to enable you to be better at what you're doing, or to amplify something that you're doing. We are an extension of what you're doing. We're not better. And so that also has changed the vernacular that I use when I present internally. I now start almost every presentation internally when I'm introducing who our team is or whatever, or who I am. I always say, we are the people in the company who have the good fortune of doing innovation 100% of the time. We're 100% focused on it, but I recognize that innovation is happening everywhere throughout our business, and so we are partners in this. We just get to spend all of our time on it. And so that's one of the ways I've tried to break down those barriers. But absolutely, when you're in a big company and you're trying to drive change, sometimes it feels like you're on a treadmill, like you're working really hard and you're not going very far.
Yeah, awesome, great answer. Maryam, same question. Obstacles and challenges, and suggestions of how you would have got around it, or how you suggest others to get around it with what it is that we're talking about tonight, culture and innovation.
So in my experience, I think the challenges can be individual or team-based. As an individual, if you're kind of an outlier in an organization, it's definitely not fun. If you want to drive change, you are going to feel lonely, you're going to feel like you don't belong, and you feel like your voice isn't being heard. And in those cases, I would say, if you're really believing in the change that you're trying to create in the organization, giving yourself enough time and bringing as many people as you can on board with the movement, it really is like a revolution within, will definitely help you, but it takes time. On a team level, I would say very similar to Zero Gravity Labs. By the way, I love that name. The space thing is awesome. But I think, I was actually talking to a former colleague who's working at a venture team within a major Canadian bank. And what he was saying was actually, from an outside, it looks like, okay, great, this team is just spinning off companies after companies, and it's meant to be the startup of that bank. But then when I was talking to him, he was saying that although their KPIs are based on startup performance, so they're expected to work and deliver at the scale and speed of a startup, every single decision is being made within the systems and within the hierarchy and bureaucracy of the bank, which is not at all fair to that team, but it's just the reality of them. I don't know how to power to you guys. I have no idea how you work around that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges, and I think part of that, honestly, I think that's what we're doing tonight. A part of that is having these kind of discussions, having these kind of get-togethers, so we can talk about this stuff and we can network with each other and we can try to find ways to constantly improve. So Gabe, same question to you, obstacles, challenges to what it is we're discussing tonight, and suggestions on how you would suggest others to get around it.
Yeah, I think that for us, the challenges are often come back to either on the front end it's about building buy-in, and then on the back end it's about integration. And so the way that we try to address both, the main way that we try to address both of those things is about it's at the human scale. It's about bringing people on board. For each one of our larger projects in government, we make sure to put together a project, what we call a project panel, which is to make sure that from the very, very beginning of the project, that there are representatives from every department who's going to be touched at any point over the course of that project. So whether that's IT or communications or legal or whomever, that there's someone from that team who's been identified and who's invited to each one of our monthly meetings to get an update on the project, and that we build a relationship and a rapport with them so that even if it's 6 months down the road, that when it is time for that person to be involved, when we do need their support in order to move the project forward, that they're a champion for the project, that they're helping us move it forward, and that they're excited to be part of the project, and that they're sharing it with their colleagues and not blocking it, and helping us address some of those hurdles that when we come up to them.
That is an awesome answer. Thank you, Gabe, for that. We're now down to our last question. I could stay here talking to these guys and asking these guys questions all night, but at the same time, this is the longest I've been sober on a Friday for years, and there's a bar back there that's calling my name, so we're going to ask these guys a question, and then I'm going to call Marcello up after that, okay? So, final question. Gabe, we're going to start with you. What advice would you give someone, regardless of business size, if they wanted to lead a cultural shift within their organization?
I mean, I guess not knowing the context. I think the thing I would suggest is is really get to know the people who you're going to need to make it happen. Make sure those people are have the information they need, that they're comfortable in the context, and that they feel really well supported in doing that work.
I love that answer, and I'm seeing a common theme here. I'm seeing the word value. We talked a lot about values. We talk a lot about people, right? So I think that's what I'm taking away from this. So Maryam, same question to you. What advice would you give to someone, regardless of their business size, to help create a cultural shift in an organization?
Yeah, I guess same answer. Know what the reason for that change is. Don't try to innovate just because it's the next cool thing to do, or you heard that. So giving a really good reason, making sure that the expectations on your team is realistic. Where are you trying to get, and where are the gaps? Where are you at, and where are the gaps, and how realistic is it to get to where you want to be? And then finally, patience. It takes time. Real change takes time.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on a similar theme on something else that you touched on before quite passionately, and that is about, if you're going to do it, make sure that it's sincere. If there's sincerity behind it, it's going to work, but you can't fake culture. I suppose you can, but it'll be very temporary, right? So Michael, last question for you. What advice would you give to an organization that's looking to institute a cultural shift?
I mean, I think I would echo exactly what you heard. We're all humans, and we come to work with some of our preconceived notions and our fears and our hopes, and so you want to understand what those things are. But I think the right point here is the patience point. So what I was going to say is you got to keep showing up, right? So you're going to hear no a lot of times, or you're not going to hear no. That sometimes is worse than hearing no, because you're kind of just meandering and floundering and waiting for that yes or no. But if you keep showing up, keep knocking on the door, keep having the same conversation, eventually you're either going to break down the walls or you're not. And I've seen a lot of intrapreneurs become entrepreneurs because they couldn't break down the walls. But if you keep showing up, if you're passionate enough about it, if you believe enough in it, I think that at some point that will transfer to other people. And if you're working with the right set of people, then they will have the belief in you, or they'll help you carry that ball forward. And sometimes, to be honest, you're not working with the right group of people, and you have to take that passion and that energy and bring it somewhere else.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I'm an awesomepreneur, by the way. I will be giving that definition later tonight. Guys, how about a round of applause for our speakers?